Welcome back to the Start and Scale podcast. I'm your host, Jack Brandwood. This is the place where I speak with people who are starting and scaling tech businesses. We'll be talking with founders, investors, and everyone in between. This week, I sit down with Rob Bowley, who is the Fractional CTO from Pragmatic Partners. Our conversation ranges from how businesses who bootstrap can be more successful, how spending money at the early stage will save you money in the long run, when the right time to hire a CTO is, and impact versus effort.
The biggest unicorns in the States that have come out of the tech sector, a majority of them were bootstrapped and they didn't take investment.
Thanks so much for listening and enjoy the episode. So hi Rob, thanks for coming on.
Hi Jack, great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
My pleasure, my pleasure. You were just talking about how we've finally got the Manchester rain back.
Yes, after some lovely cold crisp weather.
Yes. But yeah, look, as you know, I always like to start these podcasts with a fairly simple but pretty deep question. Who is Rob Bowley?
Oh, blimey. That's a bit profound. I'll probably do my usual bio. So I have been working in tech for something like 25 years now, started as a software engineer, moved into leadership roles about 12 or 13 years ago, spent most of my career in London up until about 6 or 7 years ago, most of my career in startups. More recently, I've moved into becoming my own boss. So for the first time in my life, I've always had permanent roles, but decided it was time to move into becoming my own business, Pragmatic Partners, providing technology and product leadership consultancy for startups, which is a real passion of mine.
That's incredible. Why did you call it Pragmatic Partners?
Because I think everything requires being pragmatic. As an example, with early stage startups, you're really constrained on what you've got from many angles, whether it be budget or opportunities or customers. And the balance is, with all of the practices I've built up over the years, it's always about being pragmatic with how you apply them and applying them within the context of any particular situation. So you're not doing too rough and ready, or you're not over process, trying to get the right balance to get the right impact for the customer.
That makes sense. You weren't always Rob Bowley of Pragmatic Partners. Could you tell me what you wanted to be, or could you draw me even what you wanted to be when you grew up? I know you're expecting this.
I was thinking about this, and it's the first time I've drawn it in probably 40 years.
Are you an artist, would you say?
No. So it's not going to be much better than when I drew it when I was 8 years old, but this is bringing back some memories. Now I see where I'm going. It's going to be pretty hard. There's probably some like cool rockets coming out the back here. So here's me doing a little wave from my cab, and there's probably some like loads of wheels going. There's going to be lots of wheels. I like the wheels on these. So this is basically like a space truck, and I would draw this probably about 3 times a week, where there would be like bedrooms up the top, and then probably some like massive computer down here with lots of flashing lights on it. Loads of other cool. There's probably like a kitchen down here and another laboratory up here doing experiments. But I always imagined when I was growing up, my God, so this would be like 1984 or something like that, and the year 2000 was in the horizon. So it was kind of like, this was my vision of the future, which would be me driving this kind of space truck around.
That's fantastic. And you can tell you've drawn it a few times.
I think I drew it better when I was 8 years old, but I think that'll do for now.
Yeah, I think Tomorrow's World has a lot to answer for. Where is your space truck, right?
Oh gosh, yeah, Maggie Philbin. Yeah, absolutely. I was big on that kind of thing. I was a real sort of future dreamer when I was young.
So this is Rob's space truck. So what's the actual role, do you think? What was your job?
I don't know, just traveling through time and space, doing like cool stuff with things that had buttons on that you would press.
Nice. Is it still hope, do you think?
Well, potentially, yeah, potentially.
Obviously asked you to, because the big thing is at Tax, our vision is to create a world where everyone gets their dream job, right? And that's why we always ask people to draw things out like that. And I guess, what does the term dream job mean to you?
This again, it's a funny one to think about because I think, oh, it'd be this kind of business having this kind of impact in this kind of area, and thought, no, actually, what I'd really like to be my dream job is a travel writer. Yeah, spent good amount of time traveling with my wife before we had children. Read lots of brilliant travel books, and the idea of being able to write books around your experiences traveling around the world and getting paid for it sounds pretty good to me. Maybe related to that space truck. Maybe that's how it would fund it by writing. I'm not such a fan of like Instagram these days. You've always got these kind of very attractive young people sort of going on about how wonderful their lives are wandering around the world, and it's all very superficial. I really enjoyed the books of people like Paul Theroux, who's Louis Theroux's dad, wrote some brilliant books around his travels around South America and other places. And other ones, people going mountain climbing. So Chris Bonington's written some brilliant books about how he climbed Everest in the Annapurna region, and they're so wonderful to read.
Wow. Okay. Well, who knows? Who knows? Rob, what were you like as a kid? Where did you grow up?
Grew up in the middle of nowhere, down in the deepest depths of Hampshire. So there really wasn't much going on. And of course, this was well before the time where you had lots of screens and tablets. There were 3 television channels and about an hour of kids' TV on a Saturday morning. And it's pretty boring, to be honest. But, that's where your imagination probably takes over. And I think, a lot of people that knew me when I was very young was a sort of bit of a dreamer, bit of heads in the clouds. Even when I was in the local football team, it was like the manager having to wake me up from my dream, thinking about things like computers and things like that. Didn't really have, some people from early on, like my daughter, she's adamant she's going to become a doctor. She's 8 years old. I really didn't have a clear idea of what I wanted to be.
Yeah, I always think that's a great thing about, because I have friends who either inherited a family business and doing very, very well. And I always kind of feel sorry for them a little bit, because I think something important that you're supposed to go through in life is trying to figure out what you want to do. I think it's a really important journey, trying things out. They don't necessarily work out, but that one thing leads you on to something else, and all of a sudden you fall over something and you're like, oh my God, this is fantastic. How lucky am I? It's a really worrying time, but I think a really valuable part of life. So you grew up, and then when did you get into tech?
So probably a bit of an unconventional path, but it was after university. I didn't do a computer sciences degree or anything like that. I had, when I was younger, noodled around on computers and programmed things in BASIC from the back of magazines. But yeah, just not really having any clear idea what I wanted to do, just sort of bumbled into doing a business management degree. And it was when I came out of that, fortunate basically, that it was around the time of the dot-com boom and everything was really kicking off. So sort of 1999, I think, around that time. And just very fortunate. There was a person in my village who made lots of money in the clothing business and was interested in building basically like Facebook for villages before Facebook was either around. And at the time I was like working in a pensions company doing pension reconciliation and almost thinking about, well, maybe I become a trained IFA or something like that. Not because I really wanted to, but just, again, not really sure what I wanted to do. Got this opportunity to help him start researching this idea, and that led to helping build a very basic idea for a website around it. Yeah, just one thing led to another from that. I basically blagged it. I blagged my way into a job as a content editor on a shopping website, and got made redundant from that, and then decided to pick up learning HTML and bit better than I had, and again managed to blag it by doing some of that into a job at Lycos, who were a search engine that you won't remember because you probably weren't born then, Jack, before Google came along, and then that's what moved me to London as well, and then it kind of all went from there. Just got more into programming, and that was it. So and I'm just still feel every day how fortunate and privileged I feel for having that opportunity. So many people don't. Haven't grown up in a relatively wealthy village in the south of England. Not like my family's wealthy, but wealthy people around, having those opportunities and that luck to kind of get into things, and particularly when there's people that have worked certainly harder in their life to deserve those opportunities than I have. And that's certainly something that drives me a lot still today, around how we can make it easier for people to get into tech, certainly where you don't come from those conventional backgrounds or get those opportunities. So yeah, hugely privileged, still pinch myself every day for being so fortunate.
Yeah, a lot of luck, right? A lot of luck and
Yeah.
timing involved, and it must be amazing to. I mean, I love my job, and it sounds like you really do too. There's a lot of people out there who really don't like the job, and it's scary.
Yeah, well, that's it. I certainly had jobs I didn't enjoy. At university, I was doing the bins. I'd done loads of catering, washing plates and dishes, working as a labourer, doing all the things to give you a bit of money through university and so on. And yeah, working in a pensions company really didn't float my boat. And to think that I had the luck to go and find something much more interesting and much more passionate about, yeah, amazing.
And now the great thing is you're using all that experience you've had working for early stage startups, people who've gone through Series A, even IPO, right?
Yeah.
Stage, using all that information you've gathered over the years and helping new businesses try and avoid some of the mistakes that you would see most startups make, right?
Yeah, absolutely it. I think having done sort of 12 years of permanent CTO level positions, I found even by the second one I was kind of just repeating the same things. They're genuinely often just solve problems. Worked in anything from very early stage startups to scale ups and some big organizations as well, like the Co-op and Money supermarket, and just feeling like there was an opportunity now in my career to be able to give back and provide impact in a different way. But also having been in London, I was in the Silicon Roundabout in London when that all kicked off. And it was just amazing and I loved it. And then moving to Manchester, and part of moving to Manchester for me was always about the opportunity to help grow the tech sector here. And well, frankly, a lot of it seems to be taking care of itself. But when I first moved to Manchester 6 or 7 years ago, there really weren't that many startups here. There now seems to be a lot more, which is fantastic. But what it doesn't have is that kind of heritage of experience of people having been through these situations before. And so I saw there was a real opportunity where I've got a lot of experience in that to be able to hopefully have a really positive impact on the Northwest tech ecosystem. And yeah, hopefully my clients are saying that I am, and I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah, well, I know some of your clients and they do say how great you are.
Oh,
and,
really? Oh, great.
Yeah, they do. And yeah, you're right. That's something I never thought about before. They don't have that background of early stage startup, tech startups that people can lean on up north. But it's amazing, like people we've had on this podcast, for instance, Claire Lewis, David Foreman, all talking about banging the drum about how the north needs more investment. And it's great. I mean, not even Manchester, areas like Liverpool, Sheffield,
absolutely,
Leeds, great tech hubs, and it is really, really exciting. It's exciting. It's an exciting time to be part of the north. Just leaning back on what you said before around your offering advice, obviously, to early stage startups. It's still a mysterious thing, tech, to certain people. Not as mysterious as it once was, obviously, but it is still quite mysterious, right? And it still needs experts like yourself to spell it out for us. For someone who has an idea, who is thinking, right, I want to build something, tech, where do you start? Could you lay out what the pillars are and how it works?
Yeah, well, now we're really getting into some interesting stuff. So what I've found and I've been delighted by is there is a huge amount of brilliant people in the Northwest, hugely passionate with fantastic ideas. And particularly even more so, it just really feels like a kind of Northwest thing is the kind of gumption and attitude that they have around it. There's certainly no this sense of privilege that you might have from down south and in London. And it's so inspiring to be around people like that. It really is the kind of thing that gets me out of bed in the morning. So that's really fantastic. And it is fantastic that there's now more opportunities for people to do that in the Northwest, and there's certainly more startups starting to grow. I think particularly it's a lot more at that early stage right now. But a lot of them haven't had any technical experience. They've not worked in technology organizations. Unless you are fortunate to, be someone with a technology pedigree or you've got a technology co-founder, then absolutely it's a real challenge. And the thing is, for someone like me, these are just common solved problems that you can avoid. The first thing I would say is if you want to build something is, do you really need to build something yet? Because too often one of the common challenges is jumping in too early and thinking you need to build something before you really need to. And there is so much you can do to validate your proposition before you go into that stage where you're going to need some money to build something, to actually validate whether it has got some traction. And there's some great examples of this, even in the Northwest. So Financial, who probably people who are listening from the Northwest will know well, and are one of my clients. So Financial is a service designed around supporting women with financial planning and budgeting. They identified there was a real gap around this, and particularly for women. But they started with a WhatsApp group. And from that WhatsApp group, they built a playbook as a PDF, and they built these spreadsheets and calculators to help you budget, and they sold them on the WhatsApp group. And they were able to prove there that people were willing to pay for, the service they were thinking of providing before they jumped into that stage of building something. There's another one of my clients, actually, Josh Baker at Syntho, which is a platform to help people learn how to produce house music. He started with just a generic video platform where he could put videos up, and there was the ability for people to pay to watch those videos. And again, proved that people were interested in buying them before actually going and building something. So that's my first advice always, is do that. Do the user research, do all the things to help you kind of validate your proposition before thinking that you go and need to build something.
People who are building things early, I guess, where would they start? Say they've validated their proposition in whatever way it might be. Like, for instance, really good example there with Financial. Then what's the next step? If people want to buy it, I feel like I need to build a tech product. Then what do you do?
Well, then I'd still challenge whether you need to actually build something yet. What there are a lot more of these days are platforms you can use. They're often called no-code platforms, where you can actually build something without really needing to have much technical experience. Yes, you need to learn how to use these platforms, but you can build a mobile app, you can build a website, you can build something transactional with even payments built in using these no-code platforms yourself. And it'll cost you peanuts. So I was speaking to someone I know, Rob at Gigmate, Rob March. So he's built the first iteration of his platform using a no-code platform, and he's got people in there using it. And there's many examples of this. And it may even be you could have a sustainable business, probably a small one, I would say, bringing in income using these no-code platforms without having to build something. And again, it's just another further step you can do, which is relatively cheap, relatively lightweight, to validate more around your proposition before going and building something for real. What I would advise generally, though, with these no-code platforms is they're great for prototyping. They're great for small businesses and early stage businesses. But if it really starts gaining traction, what you can find is you can certainly hit the limits of what these platforms can do, but also the cost starts rising pretty exponentially, and they can become very expensive when you're any kind of scale. So then, if that's all good, it's kind of then, right, you may want to start thinking about building something properly.
It's interesting to hear you say, because obviously, your role is to help tech teams build things, and you're saying that is the last resort.
Well, yes, it might sound a bit strange in my role to be saying that I'm regularly saying people don't build something, but it's really important. It's the same in any large business. It was absolutely the same at places like the Co-op. In a very large organization, you get the same problem, right? It's like, right, the CEO has said, I want an app. Let's go and build an app. And they've got budget to throw at it. And then it becomes a project, and it's kind of off they go before they've even validated whether there is a user need, whether there is a proposition, and whether someone's actually going to go and build it. So at the Co-op, we took a very startup approach when we started Co-op Digital, and we had 4 stages, pretty much similar to actually what the government digital services folks did, who came up and led creating Co-op Digital, which are very similar stages that a startup should really go through. So you have discovery. Go and actually find out and identify in very cheap and quick ways, what the problem is. Is there something to solve? go and do things like user research and validate it. And then you go into alpha, and alpha was where you build the prototype. And often the prototype was something you might just throw away, but it's like the quick and easy and fast way to build something to prove whether it's got value. And if that had value, then go on to beta. And beta is like when you start building the thing for real. And then beta is then leads to kind of production from there. So it's the same cycle. And the same kind of approach applies to kind of any organization, I say, and the same challenges that apply, whether it's a tiny startup or a big organization like the Co-op.
So alpha stage is complete. Beta stage. What's involved in beta stage?
Well, it's a really significant stage because often what happens, and sadly too often, and I hear stories about this probably every week, is where founders get into a situation where they've spent a lot of money, could be anything from like 40 to 150 grand, building their MVP, only to find that it doesn't do what they wanted it to. They've got into problems with the partner that's helped them build it. It doesn't work. And then they have to throw it all away and start again. If they have the fortune of having enough money to start again. And I'm particularly passionate about trying to help people avoid that happening, because it almost feels like too often than not, that's what happens. Or, you know, speaking to anybody on the exchange program, where I'm a mentor, which is an accelerator in Manchester, about their experiences with getting people to come and help them build things, it's not like any of them have had a good experience, frankly. And that's a real shame, because it's an opportunity lost. If you are a very early stage business where you've managed to secure a small amount of funding to go and start developing it, and you know, these are the things that commonly happen, then it's kind of a real shame. And it's not because their proposition's a bad idea. It's not because what they're trying to do and their idea is a bad idea. It's just the execution of it. Certainly, this is why I push a lot into doing all these things that you can do to validate it before you get to that stage. So at least you'll have more confidence that the proposition has got some legs and will have some traction. And I think if you speak to any investor these days as well, I think it's a more sustainable investment market, but it's certainly a lot harder one. They're looking for those signs of commercial traction from early on, even at kind of pre-angel stage, pre-seed stage. They want to know that there is an actual kind of value exchange where your users are going to be willing to pay for the service. And that's not just like a PowerPoint investment deck. It's like you've actually got people that are paying for something before they may be willing to invest. So I'm veering off a bit, but again, just come back to do you really need to build something yet? Because it is so important.
Would you recommend for people to try and secure some sort of seed funding before the beta stage?
Well, you need some money, right? So that's certainly one of the bigger challenges now than it was. I mean, Silicon Roundabout time and early stage, and even like 2 or 3 years ago, it was more like, well, if you've got loads of customers, if you've not got like a kind of commercial model figured out yet, don't worry about it. Just build it and get the users and worry about it later. But now it's a lot more around, well, you know, you need to be showing some traction from much early on before they're going to be interested. And yes, you're going to need some money to build something properly. Again, there are so many things you can do before you need to do that, which mean you may never have to, especially if you're not looking for kind of hyper growth. And the other thing I would also say around investment is bootstrap, which is where you don't take funding. There's so much evidence that shows that those businesses who are able to do that are more successful. In fact, I saw something the other day which suggested, you know, the sort of the biggest unicorns in the States that have come out of the tech sector, you know, a majority of them were bootstrapped and they didn't take investment. But that's easy to say, you know, if you don't have the money available to do that. So almost inevitably it does come to, well, you're going to, for a lot of people, need to find some funding to be able to build your MVP.
For instance, if you're building something that is in a highly regulated environment, say it's in gambling or, I don't know, security, something like that.
Or finance.
Or finance, yeah, of course.
There's plenty of regulated areas.
Areas. But I guess a no-code platform, would that work?
Some of them will. I mean, some of that for the benefit of them is these things are like battle tested, and there even are in some circumstances what they call vertical SaaS, which is where they're kind of market specific platforms which have been designed around these kind of things. So, quite often they will have things, especially the US based ones with like SOX baked in and PCI compliance baked in and things like that. So to some degree, yes. A lot more of the regulation comes around like your internal processes as an organization than necessarily just the tech as well anyway.
So you've gone through your Nocode platform, you've built something in this Nocode platform, people are buying it, people love it. Then you're like, right, I need to build something now. Rob keeps telling me I shouldn't build anything, and I'm trying to hire him.
Do all these things first. But the challenge is as much as what I find is when you're at that very early stage, you don't have the money to pay me anyway. Although what I would argue is like spending some money on me at that early stage is going to save you a lot of money in the long run, because you're more likely to, get an impact for the money that you spend overall. But yes, now, right, okay, we're into building something. And this is probably when people get to that stage where they've actually got some investment or the money to go and do that. It's definitely worth speaking to someone like myself who can really help them navigate how they get there. There are so many options. You could hire a developer permanently. You could try and find a technical co-founder. I think that's quite hard. You could get a developer on some form of sweat equity. Upwork's a platform where you can go and find people that, developers that can build stuff. And then you've got into partners. So, is there a local, onshore partner that can help you, which of course can be very expensive. And then you get into nearshore, where you're considering maybe like the Baltics and around Ukraine and Eastern Europe, and then offshore over to India or even like Vietnam and places like that, where it's cheaper, but not necessarily better. This is a really hard thing to navigate. First of all, you've got to have a clear idea about what it is that you want to build. There's a really important focus on scope, because entrepreneurs are great at just having like a million ideas, but this comes down to having a clear idea about what your minimum viable product is. And if anybody's not familiar with that, all I'd say is go and read the Lean Startup. It's a great book. Anybody thinking about going and doing something like this should just read the Lean Startup. But so often it's like, right, here's all these things you need. You don't actually need them to go and prove your proposition, and it will cost you a lot more to build them as well. So you've got to get that scope really, really clear and as small as possible for what you want to build, to have a chance of it happening sooner at less cost. But then the really challenging and tricky bit around that was, hope you define it. Then you're in a position to actually go and speak to people about helping you build it. And this is a really challenging one, where you've got all these different options. And I'd never recommend hiring a permanent developer at that stage. It's like high risk on kind of one person, and expensive. Similar for things like contractors as well, that's quite high risk. But then when you get into the idea of agencies and partners, that is an absolute minefield. And as much of the challenge around it is actually knowing what to ask for and knowing how to work and find the right partner for you. Some people get a recommendation from someone else that's, I work with this agency, they're very good. Doesn't necessarily mean if they were good at one thing, they're going to be good at another. It might be different tech, it might be a different sort of model of type of platform that you need to build. What I am doing at the moment, actually, I think I was speaking to you about this the other day when we were talking about this, is I have loads of conversations like this just for free every day, because it's like, it's not how I earn money, is just helping people figure out knowing what to ask for. I've got so many of these kind of emails. I'm just going to write a guide and I'm just going to give it away for free, which is going to be all of these things that I'm keen to help people avoid. Because what I really want to be doing is helping people grow their business, not coming in and cleaning up the mess after they've kind of got to this stage. Yeah, quite a detailed kind of, I'm thinking of calling it like a founder's guide to building your MVP. And it will start with, do you need to build something yet? So that supplier selection thing is really hard. And I think the interesting thing around it in that kind of dynamic of customer and supplier, the incentives aren't great. And it's not like all these partners and agencies are necessarily bad. There are certainly some that take advantage of the situation, and will certainly take advantage of non-technical founders not knowing, about the right things to ask for. But also it's in the interests of the agency to come in with like the lowest quote to get something done. And often what kind of gets thrown away are the things that are needed to make sure that once you've got your MVP, you can carry on building it. And I often call these like the operational requirement. And yeah, technical founders not going to think about these things. And often what they'll see is like they've started with this partner and they're seeing progress, right? They're seeing this website and mobile app appear and it's like, oh, this is really cool and it's really exciting. But then they get it at the end and often find out it doesn't quite work and it's got loads of bugs in it, or they're beholden to this tech partner now. And maybe they've found they've had challenges with their tech partner and they want to move away. But well, first things first, do you own your IP? My goodness, the amount of conversations I've come across where people have got a developer and sweat equity and not actually made sure that they own the code. Do you have the source code in your own source control repository? Do you own all the systems like AWS or Azure that it's built on, or are they all sitting with this partner? And they're in a really sticky situation. The amount of times I've had people just, want to speak to me to ask me how I can help where it's a bit of a mess like that. But frankly, it's very hard to move away from the partner they have because they kind of own it all. Or it's just like the engine of delivery has not been built, which is like, in the industry, we call it like continuous delivery, right? Which is basically how you automate things to make it easy to build stuff, test it works, deploy it to production and monitor it to see if it's working. More often what you find is those things have just not been done. And it's not necessarily like the partner can't do them, but it's not really in their interest to add a load of scope into it. And let's say you do get live with customers, but now changes are taking ages because it's so buggy, and every time you launch something else breaks. And what you literally have is the founder themselves acting like a tester, and every time it goes live, having to test the whole thing when founders really need to be focusing on growing their businesses. And now it's all real. You've got customers using the platform, and like your development just, drops to nearly standstill. And the interesting thing that you have is these things are really easy to get right really early on before you've built things. It takes minutes. But once you're in this situation where you haven't got tests, you can't deploy it, you haven't got monitoring and logging, it's not set up in the right way, but you've now got live customers, it costs a lot more money and time to fix it. So really also what I try and help do is not only with that kind of partner selection and making sure that those founders are being able to ask the right questions in the first place, is around these operational requirements, but also into the kind of ways of working with a partner. You really don't want to be like, right, we're going to build this thing for like 10 weeks and we'll show you at the end, and you don't have any kind of view of progress. And then what you find is like, right, that's not what I expected. Oh, that's a change request. That's a change request. We're going to need more money. So the idea was going to be like 40 or 50 grand quickly turns into a lot more because there hasn't been that kind of process in place to actually check and validate what's going as you go along. But like I say, these are all solved problems. Like probably some point in the new year, I'm going to probably publish this kind of free ebook or something, which it will save me lots of these conversations, right? Because I'm really keen to help people, but like, here, go and read this, and then let's have a chat. Because I mean, particularly in the Northwest as well, I am just really keen for these new businesses to have as many opportunities to succeed, where they're succeeding because of their proposition, not failing because of their technology, and that's where I really want to just help anyway. Yeah. Sorry, that was probably quite a lot of stuff.
That's fantastic. And
there's loads more, but I could talk forever.
Well, I'm sure this will all be in this book, and I'm very excited for it to come out. And we'll, as soon as it does, we'll publish it.
I'll give you a signed copy, Jack.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So, say you have done it right somehow. Maybe you've employed the services of yourself, and you've helped them get to the point where they've got a product and it's working. When is the right time to hire an actual CTO, full time, permanent?
It's a good question. It's an interesting one, really, because often in early stage startups, what happens is they hire someone, or they're looking to hire someone, and they call it a CTO, but what actually it is a developer. and they're not really a CTO. But what they need is someone that's just kind of, right, we want to bring it in-house now from a partner or something like that.
And how did you ask the right time to bring it in-house? Sorry if you were getting to that point.
Well, I think that there's this shift from, for me, it's where you're doing your product market fit. And you know, a lot of that kind of early stage around your MVP is validating your product market fit and the kind of traction around it. And typically what will happen through that, hopefully, is you get some revenue in, so you're actually growing revenue. Or it might be, right, you're going from a kind of pre-seed investment to like a seed investment. And it's like you've got some longer term funding, which validates hiring someone for real. And let's talk just about a developer. And, you know, one of my clients was helping hire their first developer recently. It's a long-term commitment, and you know, it's not something that kind of gives you quick wins. It's something that you want to build kind of over time to kind of bring it in-house. And yes, it is better to have your own in-house team because, again, coming back to this kind of customer-supplier relationship, it's hard to make sure the right incentives are there, and it's not always the fault of the agency. So it's typically at that kind of stage where you'd be thinking about hiring your first person, was where you think, right, we've got, I don't know, 12 months of funding on this thing. But yes, so I was on a forum today actually, and it was interesting because it kind of came up in conversation. Someone was saying, I'm seeing these CTO jobs, but a lot of them are looking for a developer. And I was saying, yeah, well, that's not a CTO. And someone else said, that's a founding engineer. So I'm going to use that now. So that's a founding, and that should be a good title rather than calling people CTO or these kind of lofty titles where you're like a CTO of a, you know, tiny business is a founding engineer. Hiring your first full-time CTO. So the important thing about a CTO is it's a strategic level role. You know, CTO is looking long-term horizons and you know, much more than like the next 2 weeks or the next month. It's right, where do we need to get to in the next 3 to 6 months, the next 3 to 6 year? How are we putting the foundations in place that will get it from that kind of early stage startup to scale up? And so typically what I would say is for that CTO level role, it typically comes in around that kind of what you might call like a Series A stage, where you can now justify the expense of hiring a strategic CTO, because for a tiny organization, the cost of a kind of actually properly experienced strategic CTO is a lot of money. I mean, it's going to cost you far more than you've probably got. And it's not worth it because it's such a small team. You can't justify having someone full-time doing it. So for me, it's probably more that CTO Series A stage, or maybe a bit sooner, depends. You know, Series A and pre-seed can range from anything from like a pre-seed being like £1 million to £10 million to a Series A being anything from like, I don't know, 2 million to 100 million. Depends if you're in the UK or the US as well. But yes, so I think founding engineer is what I would say is that kind of first hire. And typically what there'll be is an experienced software engineer. They've certainly been around the houses, and they may have had like a tech lead position where they've kind of managed people and kind of teams. But, you know, from getting that kind of bang for buck for the cost, because these people still aren't cheap, right? You'll know. They're not cheap. And, you know, it's as much as it's certainly an interesting market for hiring at the moment, and changed a lot since the crazy years of 2 years ago. You know, good people are still commanding high salaries. So founding engineer, certainly going to be enough to kind of not, you know, to be able to like take ownership of things, and ideally have that kind of experience of working in that kind of Swiss Army knife environment you need in a early stage startup, but not necessarily going to be the full. Well, the great thing about the founding engineer is the idea you can grow them into that CTO. The potential is that they grow with the organization. Certainly my first CTO role was joining somewhere as he was a principal engineer, then moving up to head of development, and then VP technology stroke CTO from there.
You also do a lot of like technical due diligence for businesses.
Yes.
Right.
Doing one at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah. And I hope it's going well. I guess what mistakes do you see in that part of, if you're going to either raise or to sell your business, what mistakes do you see when you're going through this technical due diligence with businesses?
That's an interesting one. So typically you won't have like tech due diligence or product and tech due diligence when you're going for like a pre-seed or a seed. The investors are much more interested in the idea and you, and whether you've got the ability to kind of crack on. So it's the tech due diligence becomes more of a thing when you're getting closer to that kind of Series A round, or it may be a further round of investment, or like I say, there was one I was doing which was supporting around a sort of potential acquisition path recently. So typically when I'm going and doing this tech due diligence, the organization has been there for at least 5 years. And often the problems that they have, this is the really interesting one actually, because I also do this just as a service for startups anyway. So I just call them like a tech assessment, and I'll go in, and then if I start a project, that's how I'll start, is I'll go in and do this kind of discovery phase. It's basically quite similar to due diligence, but you cover, it's not just the tech, right? Because what investors are really interested in, most importantly, is can you deliver? Are you able to execute on the plans that you say are going to take you to that growth? Because they're already interested in your idea, otherwise they wouldn't be talking to you. They now want to know, well, are you set up for success here? And that is it goes everything from the kind of your product proposition, your product strategy, your how you do product management, your team and its structure, and whether you've got the right capability in place, and if you've got any kind of gaps, skill gaps, or like single person dependencies, into your delivery, and how the teams actually go about delivering and how all that fits together, how it all aligns to that organizational strategy, and then into the tech, right? So how are things architected? How does it scale? Have you got the right things in place to make sure that you're kind of compliant? The interesting thing, regardless of whether I'm doing these as kind of tech assessments for people, which isn't due diligence, or the kind of more formal due diligence, is a lot more of the time, and interesting conversations, is around delivery, people and teams, and product strategy, and whether they're aligned. And often where the tech ain't so great, it's because it's almost more like it's a symptom of where those things meant, priorities keep changing. Certainly absolutely. This is part of the pragmatism, right? There's no point, gold plating everything, but not having a business. So the emphasis so much on early stages, like feature, get stuff out. But when the balance isn't right, to make sure that you're doing something sustainably, or priorities keep changing, or you just don't have the right people in place, then what you get is clunky tech that doesn't work, with lots of technical debt and challenges. So I think, are you set up? Do you have the right capabilities, the right people in place, effective means to kind of deliver in the first place? And it's almost like a lot of the tech stuff is kind of a hygiene exercise, and there might be a big red flag about whether they've got some kind of security controls in place or data in the wrong place and stuff like that. Usually these are fixable, right? But only if you're able to have a strategy, which means that they're going to get addressed. And often some of the challenges are that they haven't. So their tech debt is piling up, and it gets to the point quite often where it's become such a huge challenge now to deal with. Quite often these challenges are, you started in a web framework. There's this one called Angular JS, which is like probably half of the internet is still on, which was really popular. But then they decided to the next version of Angular JS is called Angular, but it's not backward compatible. You can't migrate from one to the other. So you basically have to rewrite the whole front end. And this Angular JS now has been out of support, not getting security patches for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years now. And it's like, or where there's been scalability issues and they have a performance problem, and it's like, right, let's just fix it, patch something up, but not address the fundamental issues, because strategically it's just like, move on, we got rid of that. But then that's growing as well, to the point where that's just become an enormous challenge as well. And so why does that happen? Well, if you've not got that kind of right alignment around your strategy, from your organizational strategy to that kind of product strategy, and alignment with the tech strategy, to make sure that you recognize the importance of doing these things and having the right criteria in place to prioritize, to make sure those things actually get done to some kind of level, then it gets quite difficult. And that's again stuff that's easily avoidable if you try and get it right early on and then just stay on top of it. So typically there's a kind of rule of thumb in the industry that you should afford around 20% of your sprint capacity for maintenance. And that might be upgrading libraries or frameworks, dealing with some kind of technical debt that you've accrued. Because if you don't, it just does really build up. And otherwise, I think the really interesting thing is everywhere is different. And I don't know until I'm going to go in and find out what I'm going to what's going to be the interesting thing about any particular organization, but a lot of it is, frankly, is delivery and how they go about actually getting things done, which is the bigger issue than any kind of tech debt that they have.
And again, I think that comes, you're talking there about how it gets on top of you, like this technical debt. And I guess that does come down to if you get the right partner at the beginning, because I think the wrong offshore partner or the wrong partner would probably not care.
Well, it's not in their incentives to do so, right? That's the hard thing about working with a partner, unless you get a really good one that does really care about these things. But if you're a non-technical founder and someone's got, I always do this analogy, it's probably a crap analogy, but let's say you wanted to build an extension on your house and you go and get a quote from 2 builders and you don't know anything about building. And let's say both of them come recommended as well, because it's often the case. And one of these builders says, well, I can do it in 3 months and it will cost you 30 grand. And another one says, well, I can do it it's probably more like 6 months and it's going to cost, 60 or more. Well, people will typically go with the cheaper one. Then what you find later down the road is it's not built right. The foundations aren't right, or you're having to, oh my God, the idea of, don't want to ever have to build an extension or anything like that again. Everybody seems to have a horrible time. Ends up costing more anyway. And, actually it's not built the way you wanted to. So, you can't just put it all on these, they're just providing a service. Yeah. And inevitably, they are really pushed towards trying to do it as most cost effectively for them to be actually win the business. And that's the really hard thing. And let's say you've only got 30 grand. So what are you going to do? Not build an extension? It's a difficult one. And that's, so typically this is where I can really come in and help, right? I want to give a load of stuff away for free and just get people in a position where, they can do a lot of things to mean they've got more traction, got more validity in their proposition before they get started. But when it comes into like figuring out how to choose a supplier, how you work with the partner, and actually having someone that can help you work with that partner is certainly where I can really help at that kind of very early stage. A lot of my clients also have kind of in-house teams now anyway as well.
Yeah, it is interesting, and again, I always talk to people about how practical software development and software engineering is, and tech is, if you really look at it. Again, I'm not a techie, I don't know if you can tell, but it is so practical, and the similarities between building a house and building a piece of software are so obvious. Yeah, I just like how practical software development is. So just one thing I do want to touch on, obviously you're working with a lot of founders now, and founders are an interesting breed a lot of the time. They can be quite all over the place, a bit wacky, and that's what makes them who they are, right? And what I hear a lot of the time is that they tend to have a lot of ideas. You were talking about the change requests before, and that starts to add up. Is an element of your job kind of getting all those ideas into one place and organizing them?
Yeah, absolutely. So I call myself more of a chief product and technology officer than a chief technology officer, because I've always worked in product organizations. I've managed product functions. I've built product functions. As often as not, what I'm helping with, it was actually even further up to helping them kind of define their organizational strategy. I'm helping an organization do that soon, because you've got to go upstream and have that clear idea about what is the problem you're going to solve and what are your challenges and what are the opportunities. But yeah, as much as it's into having that product strategy. And again, you got to get it right. You don't want to be kind of over processed and kind of things like this, but it's always about the ruthlessness of the decision making and your ruthless focus on doing what is going to have the biggest impact that matters. And having a way, and always things comes up. Even in large organizations, but small ones and early stage ones, you're absolutely just going to get sideswiped by an opportunity or a threat like tomorrow. And you need to be able to react to it, and you need to be able to respond to it. But often the challenge is you're just trying to do too much at the same time. And then everything goes slower, and the priorities kind of keep changing around it. And it's very expensive, and nothing really gets done. And also it is very hand to mouth at that early stage. And it kind of should be, because you should be iterating fast, experimenting and kind of prototyping. But once you've got that something of traction and product market fit, what often I find is they find it really hard to shift out of that kind of hand to mouth mentality. They've got real customers now. They need to make sure their platform's not going to fall over. They're got to be able to focus a bit more on that longer term strategy and growth, rather than just, and particularly in B2B businesses, it's like you'll get like, right, customer wants this particular thing, let's just go and do it. And I've been enough in these kind of B2B platforms where what happens is they just customize the crap out of their platform, which means you can't then make it scale across different customers, because it's got all these weird things you've done for one customer over here, which means, well, actually, we're going to have to rebuild the thing. So that ruthless focus and prioritization comes from having a product strategy and a product roadmap and an effective way to make decisions. And also understanding, right, if we're going to go and do this thing, what's the impact on the other things that we wanted to do? And making sure you understand that, and just make sure you understand the trade-offs. So you are actually going in open-eyed to the potential impact of an opportunity, and what, any organization is more defined about what they're not doing than what they are. I think it's Marty Kagan, one of these product luminaries, that kind of first said that. And if you're not clear on what you're not doing, especially in a highly constrained early stage startup, the risk is you just try and do everything. And yeah, like I say, you don't end up kind of executing on any of them well, or you miss this long-term stuff, right? So, you never get round to just, there's these small things. We need to fix the performance in that database. We know we need to kind of do this thing. Yes, this area of the code's really kludgy, and, really help if we cleaned it up, because every time we're building on top of it, we're just making it worse. Absolutely, with all these things, it's about that pragmatism with how you go about solving these problems, and that's really hard. But you've got to make trade-offs open-eyed to understand the risks and opportunities, and if you're not, that's the really hard bit.
I always heard about the shortest weighted job first. Is that correct?
Oh, I've not heard of that one.
I don't know if I'm correctly saying that, but it's literally it's a really simple thing that we do here. Is we've got all these ideas, and I've got loads of other friends who founded businesses and have a big list of ideas on the notes on the phone. And probably you're feeling like, I want to do this, I want to do that. And they go through the list and put it into an Excel spreadsheet, obviously, and they have, value versus speed, and then they just...
impact versus effort is another way. And you can do these kind of Boston matrix where you get a nice line which shows, well, the stuff that's got the right balance of impact versus effort, you focus on them. So something might have a big effort, but if it's got a big impact, then it's kind of worth doing. And yeah, there's loads of great tools now that kind of help you do this. I think more, don't get bogged down in the tools around it, but at least be going through that kind of thought process. To actually validate whether this is a nice quick win or a longer term opportunity, but the impact's going to be high, and just having a way to kind of assess that at a high level without going into like, weeks of estimation and kind of other things to try and figure it out.
Interesting. Okay. I think I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, just in case. Any people out there with an idea, piece of advice for them? What do you think?
Yeah, do you really need to build something?
I knew you were going to say that.
Yes. Well, look, I think that the most important thing I would say to any founder is tenacity. The most successful founders I know, the thing that they succeeded in was not their first rodeo. I remember the founders of a company I worked at called Masabi in London, Tom and Ben. The company was called Masabi because they first launched it around the idea of doing, I think it was mobile games. So Masabi is like a Japanesey sounding name. And over about a period of 10 years, through Masabi, Tom and Ben came up with like a zillion different things. At one point they did kind of, I think, sort of secure, I think SMS banking, or it might have been a different protocol for secure banking over a mobile phone. It was dozens, until I think they were in a train station one day and they were buying paper tickets, and it was like, this is ridiculous, mobile ticketing. I think it was about their 10th idea. And so off they went with the idea of developing a solution to mobile ticketing. And Masabi, I love, still one of my favorite jobs. That was it. And they're doing really amazingly well today, but it was like their 10th attempt. So, one of the amazing strengths I see around these kind of successful founders is they just don't give up. And I think also then within that, with the idea that you have, it's going to be hard. It's going to be really hard. It's not easy. It's certainly harder now than it was 3 or 4 years ago to do things like kind of raise funding and stuff like that. And hopefully for me, that will result in more bootstrapped and more sustainable businesses as a consequence. It takes a long time and it takes a lot of hard work, and you need to be prepared, and you need to have that tenacity to, really go at it and not expect like, oh, I can have this idea. I think some of the naivety, and I kind of understand this, is like people that come to me and they're very early in the idea stage, and they're already getting their pitch deck together with the idea they can go and get some funding for it. And unfortunately, they're going to find that having a pitch deck with a good idea but not really much else isn't going to get you very far these days. And a lot of the good advice is how you start building up your network, how you start developing those relationships with people that might not become investors for like 2 or 3 years' time, and how you tell them about how you're getting on with things. And the right time, the investors will be like, oh, right, that's interesting. I've been seeing how you're going. Great, you're doing really well. Let's have a conversation.
That's an interesting point. How do you keep everyone up to date with how your journey's going? So I guess like blogging stuff is a really good idea.
Yeah, we
right?
just do. I mean, if you get your list of people that are like happy to know, and you BCC them on email and send them an update every couple of months, like a newsletter of how your kind of business is going on.
That's a great idea. I've never heard that before. That's really good. Okay, that's very. So yeah, the whole tenacity thing is an interesting one. I mean, I was speaking to someone the other day who you would class like a serial entrepreneur. He doesn't sell cereal. He just bought and sold businesses, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I've built and sold, exited 3 businesses." And I was kind of like, "Wow, that's incredible. You must be so successful." And he said, "Yeah, but I've built 10, but I've only exited 3, and the other 7 have completely flopped due to whatever reasons." And that was his advice as well. He was like, "You don't drown by falling in the water. You drown by staying there. You need to get up, get out, and go at it again." Which is easier said than done, because it must be quite disheartening when you've had all this effort into one thing you build and it's going really well. You think it's going to be the thing that's going to make me a multimillionaire and whatever, and then it's no more.
Well, I think for me they're a certain breed, and it's a bit like musicians and creative people that just can't sit down for 5 minutes without an idea popping out of their head and just got to go and write that song or produce a bit of music. And I think I'm just not one of these people. I like supporting founders. I don't think I could ever be a founder. Apart from my own business, Pragmatic Partners, I don't think that counts. I think to agree, you're either one of these people or you're not. But I think either way, got to think with that kind of mindset around things. And I don't think we want to make it so exclusive that you have to be like this. But I do think you need to be prepared that that's the approach that you need to take. And it might be that you're very passionate about a very particular idea. It might be you're not one of these kind of entrepreneurial serial founders with 10 ideas out of your head, but it might take 10 different attempts at that same idea in 10 different ways before you land on the answer to how you go and solve that problem.
That's a really good point. 2 more questions, because I know you need to go. Really quick ones. Firstly, Pragmatic Partners, what can we expect to see over the next 12 to 18 months? Anything going on?
I don't know. I mean, so I only really sort of jumped into it probably about 6 months ago. It's a really interesting question. I'm doing really well. The business is going great. I'm absolutely loving it. I just like to do more of the same. I mean, my passion is I want to be able to look back in, years' time and say, well, like those companies and founders that I work with are doing better than they would have done if I wasn't around to help them. And I think it's all these ideas that I could grow my business and like bring in more people to kind of help. But I think at the mind, I just want to keep it to myself for now. Because the proposition at the moment is me and the value that I provide. There are opportunities to kind of do different things, but I think otherwise it's, I want to continue to be able to have the time to support people on a kind of free basis, free mentoring, things like the exchange and other places, to help them have as many chances of success. I want to always make sure there's enough time to do those kind of things rather than kind of booking myself up with so much work that I'm not able to do that. And so I'm just such a passionate supporter of ecosystems in the community. So actually, I think today or a couple of days ago, got announced I'm Pragmatic Partners are a patron of the Manchester Tech Festival, Women in Tech Festival in March next year, which is lovely that I'm able to kind of support things like that in that way.
Incredible.
And I'm particularly keen to try and be supporting as many organizations across the Northwest as well. I've got like a client in London at the moment, but most of my clients are either kind of Liverpool or Manchester based. Maybe more in Leeds would be nice. Yeah, we'll just see where it goes. I'm enjoying it at the moment though.
That's very exciting, sir. And last question I always like to end on, if today was your last day on Earth, and sorry, it's very dramatic, and you weren't on this podcast, of course, or spending time with family, because obviously you would be.
You don't count family.
What would you be doing?
I'd be at a massive rave.
Do you think? Oh,
Yeah.
nice. Okay. Any particular artists or DJs you like to listen to?
Not R&B or garage. I don't know, but I think some of my fondest memories, certainly whilst I was there, not necessarily the days after, was just being a massive party.
Wow, love that. Fantastic. That's the best answer I've had.
Go out with a bang.
Yeah, why not, eh? Well, fantastic. Look, thank you so much for coming on. It's been really valuable. I'm really looking forward to people listening to this episode. And I think what you're doing is super valuable to the tech ecosystem in the North. And I've known you for ages. You're a great bloke. So anyone who's interested,
thanks, Jack. You too, mate.
Thank you very much. And yeah, thanks for coming on.
Oh, thanks so much. I've really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for inviting me along.
And that's it for this week's episode. Thanks so much for listening, and I really hope you enjoyed it. Anything we talked about will be linked in the show notes. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. And we'll catch you on the next one.